Sometimes the people you've given everything to are the ones who appreciate it the least. That's what I told myself as I sat alone at the restaurant table I'd reserved for 4, a small cake with 70 unlit candles melting in the summer heat. My phone showed no missed calls, no apologetic texts, just the hollow blue glow of social media where, minutes earlier, I'd discovered where my children really were. My son Mark and daughter Jenny weren't stuck in traffic or handling work emergencies. They were across town, dressed in their finest toasting champagne glasses with Victoria, the woman my late husband left me for 20 years ago. I'd spent 4 decades raising them, sacrificing everything, and on my milestone birthday, they chose her instead of me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply paid the bill, declined the waiter's pitying offer to box the untouched cake, and drove home to my empty house. What happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for them too. You see, what my children didn't realize that evening was that I had been finalizing my will the very week before. Their absence that night wasn't just a missed dinner, it was the moment I decided to rewrite their inheritance completely. My name is Eleanor Wilson, though everyone's always called me Ellie. For most of my 70 years, I defined myself as a giver, a devoted wife, a dedicated mother, a reliable friend. I raised 2 children while building a career as a pharmacist in our town of Lakeside. My husband Robert and I bought our colonial house on Maple Street when we were newlyweds, planning to fill it with laughter and love. For nearly 30 years, I thought we had. I still remember that crisp October afternoon when everything changed. I'd come home early from the pharmacy, wanting to surprise Robert with an anniversary dinner. We'd been married 28 years, and I'd taken the rare step of leaving work before closing to make his favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted garlic potatoes. I'd even splurged on a bottle of the Cabernet Sauvignon we'd discovered on our trip to Napa Valley 5 years earlier. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Nothing unusual there. We lived in a friendly neighborhood where people often had visitors. But something felt off. The house was too quiet when I entered. None of the usual classical music Robert played while grading papers for his university classes. Then I heard it, hushed laughter from upstairs, a woman's voice. I've replayed that moment thousands of times in my mind, the creaking step on our staircase that always announced a visitor, the way Robert's office door was slightly ajar, the flash of blonde hair I glimpsed before I even pushed the door open. Victoria, his legal secretary, was perched on his desk, her blouse unbuttoned, Robert's hands where they had no business being. "Ellie," he said, his face draining of color. Not, "I can explain," or, "This isn't what it looks like." Just my name, as if identifying me was all he could manage. Victoria didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She straightened her blouse unhurriedly, looking at me with something close to pity. I later discovered they'd been having an affair for over 2 years. She was 15 years younger than me, with the kind of polished beauty that requires considerable maintenance. "I think you should go," I told her, my voice surprisingly steady. "Actually," Robert interjected, "we need to talk, Ellie. Victoria isn't going anywhere." That's when he told me he wanted a divorce. Not after she'd left, not after we'd had time to discuss our nearly 3 decades of marriage in private, but right there, with her still in the room, as if I were the intruder in my own home. Mark was in his final year of college then. Jenny was a sophomore. I'd like to say they stood firmly by my side when they learned about their father's betrayal, but the truth is more complicated. They were adults, technically, but still so young. Robert was their father, their hero, and Victoria, with her designer clothes and effortless charm, knew exactly how to win them over. "Your father deserves to be happy," she told them during a dinner I wasn't invited to. Sometimes people grow apart. It happens to the best families. I didn't fight for custody. Our children were already grown. I didn't even fight for the house, though I could have. The attorney I hired was surprised by my acquiescence. "You're entitled to half of everything, Mrs. Wilson. More considering the circumstances," she told me, her expression concerned. "I just want to be done," I replied. "I want enough to start over." What I fought for instead was my dignity. I moved into a smaller house across town, threw myself into my work, and focused on maintaining relationships with my children. That proved harder than I expected. Robert and Victoria married less than a year after our divorce was finalized. She redecorated our family home, replacing 30 years of memories with modern furniture and abstract art. Worse, she immediately positioned herself as a second mother to my children. "Victoria's really cool, Mom," Jenny told me during one of our increasingly infrequent visits. "She's helping me pick out my internship wardrobe. She knows all these important people in the city." Mark was equally enchanted. "Dad and Vicky are taking me to Europe after graduation," he announced proudly. The trip to Europe had been my idea originally, a reward for Mark completing his degree. But I could no longer afford such extravagance on my single income. I swallowed my hurt and smiled. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Take lots of pictures for me." The years passed. Mark married Sophia, a quiet, thoughtful woman I immediately liked. Jenny found Daniel, a high school football coach with a booming laugh. Grandchildren followed, Olivia, then Lucas and Emma. I threw myself into being the best grandmother possible, babysitting whenever needed, attending every school play and soccer game. Robert continued his successful career as a university professor, eventually becoming department chair. Victoria established herself as a socialite in Lakeside, serving on charity boards and hosting lavish parties. I worked at the pharmacy until retirement, saving carefully, investing wisely. I never remarried, though there were a few relationships that might have developed if I'd let them. What my children never knew, what Robert himself probably never realized, was that I had been the primary breadwinner for most of our marriage. My pharmacist salary had paid for our home, for the children's education funds, while Robert pursued his academic career. After our divorce, I quietly continued to build my nest egg, living modestly while making shrewd investments in rental properties and the stock market. By the time I approached 70, I had amassed considerable wealth, not a fortune perhaps, but enough to ensure I would never worry about money again, and enough to leave a meaningful inheritance for Mark and Jenny. The relationship with my children stabilized over time, but always felt slightly strained. Every holiday became a negotiation. Which meals would be spent at my house, which at Robert and Victoria's larger, more impressive home. I noticed how Mark and Jenny unconsciously adjusted their behavior depending on which parent they were with. With me, conversations revolved around practicalities. The children's school progress, home repairs, health concerns. With Robert and Victoria, it was exotic vacations, country club memberships, and charity galas. I never complained. I told myself that what mattered was that they still made time for me. When Robert died suddenly of a heart attack 5 years ago, I attended the funeral and stood in the back, watching Victoria receive condolences as the grieving widow. Mark and Jenny stood beside her, forming a family unit I was clearly not part of. "Mom, you should join us at the front," Jenny had said, almost as an afterthought. "I'm fine here," I replied, and we both knew it was true. Robert had stopped being my husband 20 years earlier. What surprised me was how Victoria maintained her grip on my children even after his death. If anything, their bond seemed to strengthen, united by shared grief. After the funeral, I overheard Mark telling a relative, "Thank goodness Dad had Victoria these past years. She made him so happy." The words stung more than they should have. Had I not made Robert happy during our 28 years together? Had those decades meant nothing compared to his time with Victoria? I didn't allow myself to dwell on these thoughts. I had built a good life for myself. I had my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the community center, my close friendship. With Diane from next door, I was content, if not exactly happy. As my 70th birthday approached, I allowed myself a rare moment of sentimentality. 7 decades on this earth seemed worth celebrating. I made a reservation at Castellanos, the nicest restaurant in Lakeside, and invited Mark, Jenny, and their spouses. "Of course we'll be there, Mom," Jenny assured me over the phone. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Mark had readily agreed as well. "I'll make sure Sophia keeps her schedule clear too. The Big 7-0 deserves a proper celebration." I felt a flutter of excitement, something I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe this milestone would mark a new chapter in my relationship with my children. Maybe they finally saw me, really saw me, not just as their mother, but as a person, with my own life and value. I spent more than I usually would on a new dress, a deep blue sheath that brought out the color in my eyes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had my silver hair styled at the salon rather than trimming it myself as I usually did. I even indulged in a manicure, something I rarely bothered with since retiring from the pharmacy. The day of my birthday dawned bright and clear. I received lovely floral arrangements from both Mark and Jenny, delivered to my home. The cards promised to see me that evening. I puttered in my garden that morning, deadheading roses and weeding around my prized hydrangeas. I took extra care, getting ready, applying makeup with a steadier hand than most women my age could manage. I arrived at Castellanos 10 minutes early, wanting to be there when my family arrived. The hostess led me to the table I'd reserved, a quiet corner with a lovely view of the garden patio. I ordered a glass of champagne while I waited. At 7:15, 15 minutes past our reservation time, I sent a text to both Mark and Jenny. "I'm at the table whenever you're ready. No rush." At 7:30, I called Mark's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called Jenny next and got the same result. By 8 I had finished my champagne and was trying to hide my concern from the increasingly sympathetic waiter. "Would you like to order, ma'am, or wait a bit longer?" he asked. "Just a few more minutes," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm sure they've just been delayed." While I waited, I absently scrolled through my social media feed, something I rarely did. That's when I saw it. A photo posted just 30 minutes earlier by Victoria. The caption read, "Wonderful evening celebrating another trip around the sun with my beautiful family. So blessed. Birthday girl. Family time." The photo showed Victoria beaming at the head of an elegantly set table. Beside her sat Mark and Sophia on one side, Jenny and Daniel on the other. My grandchildren were there too, dressed in their Sunday best. They were in Victoria's dining room, the one that had once been mine, raising glasses in a toast. My first thought was confusion. Victoria's birthday was in March, not August. Then I remembered. Robert's birthday was today, the same as mine. After his death, Victoria had apparently claimed his birth date as an occasion for family gatherings, and my children had chosen to attend her celebration instead of mine. I put down my phone and stared at the flickering candle on the table. The waiter approached again, his expression now unmistakably pitying. "Perhaps I could pack up a meal for you to take home?" he suggested gently. I shook my head. "Just the check, please." He hesitated. "We have a small cake prepared. It was meant to be a surprise." That's when I saw it being wheeled over, a beautiful cake with "Happy 70th Birthday, Eleanor," written in elegant script. The restaurant had prepared it based on Mark's instructions when he'd called to confirm the reservation. So they had remembered, had planned to be here, until something, or someone, changed their minds. Would you like us to box it up? The waiter asked. No, I said, gathering my purse. Thank you, but no. I paid the bill, adding a generous tip to compensate for the empty table, and walked to my car with as much dignity as I could muster. I didn't cry until I was safely home, door locked behind me. Then I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of tears before wiping my eyes and making a decision. The next morning, I called my attorney, the same one who had handled my divorce years earlier. Meredith, I said when she answered, I need to make some changes to my will. How soon can we meet? 2 days later, I sat in Meredith's office, explaining exactly what I wanted to do with the estate I had quietly built over the years. By the time I left, the paperwork was being drawn up, and for the first time since seeing that devastating photo, I felt a sense of peace. That evening, my doorbell rang. Jenny stood on my porch, a small gift bag in her hands, her expression contrite. Mom, she began, I am so sorry about missing your birthday dinner. There was this thing at Victoria's. I know, I interrupted. I saw the photos. Her face flushed. You did? Oh God, Mom, it wasn't planned that way. Victoria sprung it on us at the last minute. She was feeling really down about Dad's birthday coming up, and Mark thought, It's fine, Jenny, I said, not inviting her in. You made your choice. Don't be like that, she pleaded. We were going to reschedule with you. In fact, that's why I'm here. We want to take you to dinner this weekend. The whole family. Anywhere you want to go. I looked at my daughter. Really. Looked at her. She was beautiful, successful, a good mother to her children. But standing there on my porch, making excuses, she also seemed very small. I appreciate the thought, I said, but I've made other plans. What plans? She asked, sounding genuinely confused, as if she couldn't imagine what could possibly fill my calendar. I've decided to travel, I told her. Something I've always wanted to do but never made time for. My flight leaves on Sunday. Travel? Where? For how long? Her questions tumbled out, tinged with alarm. I'm not sure yet, I replied honestly. I'll start with the national parks out west. After that, maybe Europe. I've always wanted to see the Mediterranean. But what about the kids? Olivia has her dance recital next month, and Lucas is starting baseball. I'm sure they'll understand that their grandmother has her own life to live, I said, using the same words Victoria had once used to justify Robert's absence at Olivia's 5th birthday party. The gift bag in Jenny's hand dropped slightly. Is this because of the birthday dinner? Mom, we made a mistake, but you're being dramatic. This isn't like you. She was right. It wasn't like me, the old me who accommodated everyone else's needs, before my own. But sitting alone at that restaurant table had changed something fundamental inside me. I saw with sudden clarity how I had allowed myself to become an afterthought in my children's lives, always available, always understanding, always putting their convenience before my dignity. I'm not being dramatic, Jenny. I'm being honest. For perhaps the first time in decades, I gently took the gift bag from her hand. Thank you for this. I'll open it later. Mom. Good night, Jennifer, I said, and closed the door. Inside the bag was a scarf, lovely but impersonal, the kind of gift you might give a distant aunt. There was a card signed by Mark, Jenny, and their families, obviously purchased and written in haste. The message was generic. Happy birthday to a wonderful mother and grandmother. Love always. I placed the scarf and card on my coffee table and sat down to finish planning the first trip of my new life. Yellowstone National Park was first on my list. I'd booked a guided tour for seniors that promised moderate hiking and comfortable accommodations. After that, the Grand Canyon, then possibly Yosemite. Places I'd always dreamed of seeing but had postponed while raising children, supporting Robert's career, and later, trying to maintain my tenuous connection to my grandchildren. As I researched hotels and tours, I felt lighter than I had in years. The inheritance I'd planned to leave Mark and Jenny would now fund a different legacy. Not one measured in dollars and cents, but in experiences, in living fully for whatever time I had left. My phone buzzed repeatedly that evening. Texts from Mark, from Jenny, even from their spouses. I turned it off and went to bed early. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with their confusion and displeasure. Tomorrow, and all the days that followed, would be lived on my terms. At 70, I was finally putting myself first. And it felt like freedom. I woke early the next morning, my decision still firm in my mind. The house felt different somehow, lighter, as if the walls themselves approved of my choice. I made coffee and carried it out to my garden, watching the morning light filter through the maple trees I'd planted when I first moved here. The roses needed deadheading again. I had always been diligent about garden maintenance, unable to tolerate wilting blooms or encroaching weeds. That morning, I simply enjoyed the imperfection, the natural cycle of growth and decay. My phone had accumulated 17 missed calls and 23 text messages overnight. Most were from Jenny and Mark, with a few from Sophia thrown in. None from Daniel, which didn't surprise me. My son-in-law had always been the most distant of the group, more focused on his coaching career than family politics. I scrolled through, the texts without responding, each message more urgent than the last. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk." Mark, "This is ridiculous. Answer your phone." Danny, "Eleanor, the kids are very concerned. Please let someone know you're all right." Sophia. The last one made me laugh out loud, startling a robin hunting for worms in my flower bed. Concerned? They hadn't been concerned when I sat, alone at Castellanos, watching my birthday candles melt. They hadn't been concerned during all the years I'd adjusted my schedule to babysit at a moment's notice, or during the holidays when I was invited as an afterthought, or when I rearranged my home to accommodate visits that were increasingly rare and brief. I finished my coffee and went inside to prepare for my appointment at First National Bank. I had accounts to consolidate, automatic payments to arrange for the time I'd be traveling. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror on my closet door. I hadn't really looked at myself in years, not properly. The woman who gazed back at me had good posture, clear eyes, and more energy than many people decades younger. My silver hair was cut in a practical bob that required minimal fuss, my body lean from years of gardening and daily walks around the neighborhood. I looked capable, ready for whatever came next. At 10 o'clock, I pulled into the bank parking lot. I'd chosen this time deliberately, knowing Mark would be with clients all morning. He did the banking for half the businesses in Lakeside through his accounting firm, and the last thing I wanted was an awkward encounter in the marble-floored lobby. The young banker who helped me, Kyle, according to his nameplate, was efficient and discreet, making the necessary arrangements without asking too many personal questions. "And you're certain about closing the custodial accounts for your grandchildren?" he asked, the only moment he showed any hesitation. "Quite certain," I replied. "The funds will be better utilized in my travel account." These weren't their college funds. Those were separate trusts I had no intention of touching. These were the gift accounts I'd established for each grandchild, intending to give them substantial sums on their 21st birthdays. Emma, Lucas, and Olivia would still have their education provided for, but the extras, the starter home down payments or dream wedding funds I'd envisioned, those would now fund my own dreams instead. I was leaving the bank when my phone rang again. Jenny. I hesitated, then answered, mentally preparing for the barrage. "Mom, finally! Where have you been? We've been worried sick." Her voice was high-pitched, stressed. "I've been at home, Jenny, and then at the bank. I'm not missing, just busy." "Busy? Too busy to answer your phone? Mark drove by your house last night and your lights were off. We thought—" She broke off, and I could picture her, hand pressed to her forehead in the dramatic gesture she'd perfected as a teenager. You thought what? That I'd expired from the shock of being stood up on my birthday? The sarcasm in my voice surprised even me. There was a moment of silence before Jenny spoke again, her tone modulated into the patient one she used with difficult students. Mom, we've apologized for that. It was a terrible mix-up. Victoria was really struggling with Dad's birthday, and Jenny, I interrupted. I'm standing in a parking lot and I have errands to run. Did you need something specific? Another silence, longer this time. Yes, actually. Daniel's mother is in town this weekend, and I was hoping you could take the kids Saturday afternoon, just for a few hours while we have lunch with her. The request was so typical, so presumptuous, that I almost laughed. 24 hours ago, I would have readily agreed, rearranging whatever plans I might have had to accommodate my daughter's needs, but not today. I'm afraid that won't be possible. I have appointments all day Saturday preparing for my trip. What appointments could possibly take all day? The edge in her voice was unmistakable now. Travel clinic for vaccinations, shopping for appropriate gear, meeting with my house sitter, quite a lot, actually. House sitter? Mom, how long are you planning to be gone? I'm not sure yet. At least 2 months, possibly longer. 2 months? Her voice rose in pitch again. That's insane. What about your responsibilities here? What responsibilities would those be exactly? She sputtered. Your garden? Your house? Your family obligations? The garden will be maintained by a service. The house will be looked after by a sitter. And as for family obligations, I wasn't aware I had any binding commitments on my calendar. Mom, you're being ridiculous. You can't just take off for months without consulting anyone. Actually, I can. That's the wonderful thing about being 70 and answerable to no one. I softened my tone slightly. Jenny, I've put my own wishes on hold for decades. I'm not asking for anyone's permission to live my life now. Is this some kind of punishment for missing your birthday? Because if it is, goodbye, Jenny. Give my best to Daniel's mother. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my purse, ignoring when it immediately started ringing again. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I visited my doctor for a checkup and necessary travel vaccinations. I bought hiking boots, moisture-wicking clothes, a new digital camera, and a lightweight suitcase with smooth rolling wheels. I notified my neighbors, arranged for my mail to be forwarded, and finalized details with a reliable house sitter, a retired teacher who needed a place to stay while her own home underwent renovations. Mark showed up unannounced on Friday evening. Just as I was finishing dinner, I saw his car pull into my driveway through the kitchen window and sighed, preparing myself for the confrontation I'd been avoiding. Mom, he said when I opened the door, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. We need to talk. Mark had always been the more diplomatic of my children, the peacemaker. He had Robert's height and my dark eyes, with a seriousness that had been present even in childhood. He was dressed in business attire, clearly having come straight from work, his tie loosened slightly at the neck. Would you like some tea? I offered, leading him into the living room. No, I don't want tea. I want an explanation. He noticed the open suitcase in the corner, half packed with my new outdoor clothing. So it's true. You're really going through with this sudden vacation. It's not sudden to me, I replied, sitting down in my favorite armchair. I've wanted to see the national park since before you were born. He paced in front of me, hands in his pockets. And it has to be right now? For months at a time? Mom, this isn't like you. You've always been stable, reliable. Perhaps too reliable, I said quietly. He stopped pacing and looked at me, directly. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've spent my entire adult life being what everyone else needed me to be. Your father's supportive wife, your and Jenny's devoted mother, your children's available grandmother. When was the last time anyone asked what I needed, what I wanted? Mark had the grace to look uncomfortable. Of course we care about what you want, but this, he gestured at the suitcase, this is extreme. Jenny says you refuse to watch. The kids this weekend. You've never refused before. I have plans. Plans that can't be changed for your own grandchildren? His tone was incredulous. Yes, Mark. Plans that are important to me. Just as Victoria's birthday celebration was apparently too important to miss, even though it meant standing me up on my 70th birthday. He flushed. That was unfortunate. A miscommunication. Victoria was having a really hard time. Oh, spare me, I said, my patience finally snapping. I'm tired of hearing about Victoria's feelings. I've spent 20 years hearing about Victoria's feelings. What about mine? Did either of you consider how I might feel, sitting alone in that restaurant while the staff pitied me? Mark looked, genuinely surprised. You never talk like this. No, I don't. I've spent a lifetime swallowing my feelings to keep the peace. Not anymore. He sat down on the sofa, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. So this trip is about, what, punishing us? Making a point? This trip is about me, Mark. Not everything is about you or Jenny or Victoria. Sometimes it's just about me. And what about Olivia? And Lucas and Emma? They'll miss you. It was the first argument that gave me pause. I adored my grandchildren, even though I sometimes felt they took my presence for granted. They were innocents in this family. Drama, not responsible for their parents' choices. I've already arranged to video chat with them regularly, and I'll be sending postcards from every stop, I said. Besides, I'll be back before the school year ends. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache momentarily. I just don't understand why now. Why so suddenly? I considered deflecting again, but decided on honesty instead. Because sitting in that restaurant alone on my birthday made me realize something. I'm not guaranteed tomorrow, Mark. None of us are. Your father died at 68, thinking he had decades left. I'm 70 now, healthy and able-bodied, with the resources to see places I've always dreamed of seeing. Why wouldn't I go now? He had no answer for that. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again, his voice softer. Jenny and I talked about throwing you a make-up birthday dinner. We could do it tomorrow night before you leave. That's kind, but no thank you. My birthday has passed. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I need to finish. Packing now. My flight leaves early Sunday morning. Mark rose reluctantly. At least let me drive you to the airport. Diane from next door is taking me. Mom. Goodbye, Mark. I'll send you my itinerary once I'm settled in Yellowstone. After he left, I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Conflict had never been my strong suit. I'd spent decades smoothing rough edges, finding compromises, keeping the peace. Standing my ground was unfamiliar territory, but also oddly exhilarating. I finished packing that night, leaving out only what I'd need for the final day before departure. As promised, I emailed my complete itinerary to both, Mark and Jenny, along with the contact information for my house sitter. I might be asserting my independence, but I wasn't being reckless. Saturday passed in a flurry of last-minute preparations. Jenny called twice more, each conversation shorter and tenser than the last. By evening, an uneasy truce had been established. They didn't approve of my plans, but had realized they couldn't change them. Diane picked me up at 5:30 Sunday morning, her compact car already running in my driveway. She was a widow like me, though her husband had died of cancer rather than leaving her for someone else. We had bonded over garden tips and gradually became close friends, sharing coffee on our adjoining patios and occasionally taking day trips to coastal towns or garden shows. "Ready for the big adventure?" she asked as she helped load my suitcase into her trunk. "More than ready," I replied, taking one last look at my house before getting into the car. The airport was quiet at that early hour, the check-in process smooth and efficient. Diane walked me as far as security, giving me a tight hug before I joined the screening line. "Call me from Yellowstone," she said. "I want to hear all about it." "I will," I promised, "and thank you for everything." As I settled into my seat on the plane, I felt a curious mixture of emotions: anxiety about the unknown ahead, sadness for the broken family relationships behind, but overwhelming everything else, a powerful sense of anticipation. The woman across the aisle, noticing my white knuckles during takeoff, offered a sympathetic smile. "First flight?" she asked. "First flight in a very long time," I acknowledged, "and the first of many, I hope." Yellowstone exceeded every expectation, the vastness of it, the primal beauty, the sense of insignificance it instilled when standing before geological wonders millions of years in the making. It was humbling and exhilarating all at once. I joined a tour group of similar-aged travelers, many of them also embarking on delayed dreams. There was Margaret from Florida, finally seeing the country after caring for her husband through a decade of Alzheimer's. There was Howard from Maine, a retired school principal whose wife had declared she was too old for camping and sent him off with her blessing. There was Beatrice from Oregon, traveling solo at 75 after discovering her husband's longtime affair. We formed quick bonds, the kind that develop when people share intense experiences in compressed time frames. I found myself laughing, more than I had in years, staying up late around campfires, sharing stories and marshmallows like college students on break. I took photographs of everything: geysers erupting, buffalo grazing, sunrise over mountain ranges, and dutifully sent postcards to my grandchildren with specific details I thought would interest each of them. As promised, I video chatted with Olivia, Lucas, and Emma once a week. Their initial sullenness at my absence gradually gave way to curiosity about my adventures. Olivia, at 17, was the most understanding. "It's pretty cool that you're doing this, Grandma," she said during our third call. "Most of my friends' grandparents just sit around watching TV all day." "Well, I've done my share of that too," I admitted. "But there's a whole world out there I haven't seen yet." "Will you go to Paris? That's where I want to go someday." "It's on my list," I told her. "Maybe when you're in college, you could meet me there for a visit." Her face brightened at the idea. "That would be amazing." Lucas and Emma, at 14 and 12, were less interested in my travelogue and more concerned with showing me their latest achievements: Lucas's soccer trophy, Emma's art project. I listened attentively, offered praise, and felt the familiar tug of grandmotherly love. I missed them, certainly, but not enough to abandon my journey and return to my old role. Mark and Jenny were less enthusiastic about our calls. They appeared briefly at the beginning or end of the children's conversations, their comments polite but strained. Neither mentioned my birthday again, nor did they ask when I planned to return. Pride, I suspected, prevented them from showing too much interest in my new life. From Yellowstone, I moved on to the Grand Canyon, then Zion National Park, then Bryce Canyon. Each location offered its own wonders, its own challenges. I discovered muscles I didn't know I had, developed calluses on my hands from gripping walking sticks, learned to layer clothing for rapidly changing weather conditions. I met new people at each stop, exchanged email addresses with some, said goodbye to others knowing we'd never meet again. Throughout my journey, I maintained my weekly video calls with my grandchildren, but I noticed a gradual change in their demeanor. They seemed less enthusiastic, more distracted. Olivia, who had been the most supportive, now barely looked at the camera during our conversations, her responses monosyllabic. I attributed it to teenage mood swings until our 6th week of calls, when I finally asked directly, "Is everything all right, Olivia? You seem distant lately." She glanced off camera as if checking whether someone was listening before answering. "It's just, things are weird here, Grandma." "Weird how?" She hesitated again. "Dad and Mom are fighting a lot. About money, I think. I heard Dad yelling about the mortgage last night." That surprised me. Mark and Sophia had always seemed financially stable. He had a successful accounting practice, and she worked as a physical therapist at the local hospital. Their home was comfortable, but not extravagant. "I'm sure they'll work it out," I said, not wanting to pry further with a teenager. "Maybe," she said, unconvinced. "And Aunt Jenny and Uncle Daniel are arguing too. Emma says they're talking about selling their house." This was even more surprising. Jenny and Daniel had built their home 10 years ago, a spacious place on a large lot, near the high school where they both worked. The thought of them selling it seemed drastic. "Have you asked your parents about it?" Olivia shrugged. "They don't tell us anything. Just keep saying everything's fine, but it's obviously not." She finally met my eyes through the screen. "When are you coming home, Grandma?" The plaintive question tugged at my heart. "I'm in California now, heading up the coast. I should be back in Lakeside by early May." "That's still more than a month away." "I know, sweetheart, but I'll keep calling every week, and you can always text me if you need to talk." After we hung up, I sat on my hotel bed, troubled by what Olivia had shared. Financial problems severe, enough to cause marital arguments and potential home sales. It seemed extreme, especially for two households that had always appeared comfortably middle class. Unless. A suspicion began to form in my mind. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank accounts, checking the transaction history. Everything appeared normal. Regular withdrawals for my travel expenses, automatic payments for bills back home, no unusual activity. Then I checked my investment account, where the bulk of my assets were held. Also normal. But what about the automatic transfers I'd been making to Mark and Jenny's accounts for years? The monthly deposits I'd set up to help with their mortgages, the children's activities, unexpected expenses. Those had stopped when I left on my trip. I'd canceled them. During my visit to the bank that day after my birthday, redirecting the funds to my travel account instead. At the time, it had seemed a justified decision. Why should I continue subsidizing their comfortable lives when they couldn't even make time for my birthday dinner? But I hadn't considered how dependent they might have become on those regular infusions of cash. I did some quick mental calculations. I'd been giving each household $2,000 monthly for nearly 15 years, ever since Mark started his accounting firm and Jenny bought her first home. That was $24,000 per year per family, or $360,000 per family over 15 years. $720,000 total. No wonder they were feeling the financial strain of my absence. I closed my laptop, unsure how to feel about this realization. On one hand, I felt a twinge of guilt for withdrawing support they had clearly come to depend on. On the other hand, I felt a surge of resentment that my adult children, both with good careers, both in two-income households, had allowed themselves to become so dependent on my handouts that they couldn't manage without them. I hadn't intended my trip as a financial lesson, but perhaps it was serving as one anyway. Mark and Jenny were in their 40s, well-established professionals with children of their own. If they couldn't live within their means at this stage of life, when would they? The next morning, I joined a whale-watching tour off the California coast, determined to put family concerns aside for the day. Standing on the deck of the small boat, watching magnificent creatures breach the surface of the Pacific, I felt again the expansiveness that had characterized this journey. The world was so much larger than the small dramas of Lakeside, so much grander than the petty grievances that had consumed my attention for years. That evening, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a marketing call. but some instinct made me accept it. "Eleanor Wilson?" a male voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Wilson, this is Dr. Patel from Lakeside Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter, Jennifer Parker." My heart seized. "What's happened? Is she all right?" "She's stable. Now," he assured me quickly. "But she was admitted this afternoon with symptoms of extreme anxiety and hypertension. Her blood pressure was dangerously elevated, and she experienced what we believe was a panic attack." "A panic attack? Jenny?" My daughter had always been the picture of composed efficiency, managing classroom full of teenagers, a household, and community responsibilities with apparent ease. "These conditions can affect anyone, Mrs. Wilson, especially during times of significant stress. Your daughter mentioned financial pressures and family concerns." I closed my eyes, guilt washing over me. Had my actions contributed to Jenny's condition? "I understand you're currently traveling," Dr. Patel continued. "Jennifer is not in any immediate danger, but she did ask if we could contact you. Would you like to speak with her?" "Yes, please, if she's able to talk." There was a rustling sound as the phone changed hands, then Jenny's voice, smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "Mom?" "Jenny, sweetheart, are you all right? What happened?" She began to cry, soft, hiccuping sobs that broke my heart. "Everything's falling apart, Mom. The bank called about the mortgage. We're 3 months behind. Daniel's job is at risk, with the school district budget cuts. Emma needs braces, and the insurance won't cover most of it." And then Victoria called. She trailed off, catching her breath. "What about Victoria?" I prompted gently. "She's selling the house. Dad's house. Our childhood home. She says she's moving to Arizona to be near her sister. She didn't even give us a chance to figure out if we could buy it from her. There's already a buyer." I absorbed this information in silence. So Victoria was finally leaving Lakeside. I couldn't pretend to be sorry about that, but I understood why it would upset Jenny, especially piled onto her other stresses. "Jenny, listen to me. You're going to be fine. All of these problems have solutions." "How?" she whispered. "We're drowning here, Mom, and you're off seeing the world, and I'm happy for you, I really am, but we needed you, and you just left." The accusation stung, but I couldn't deny the element of truth in it. I had left, abruptly changing the financial and emotional ecosystem of our family without fully considering the consequences. "I'll be on the next flight home," I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. "No, don't," she protested weakly. "Your trip can wait. Family comes first." Even as I said it, I realized I still believed it, despite everything. "I'll call you when I have my flight details. Try to rest now." After hanging up, I sat motionless on the edge of my hotel bed, my mind racing. Jenny's health crisis had forced a reckoning I hadn't been prepared for. 6 weeks of travel had given me perspective and confidence, but it had also allowed me to avoid confronting the full impact of my decisions on those I loved. I booked a flight to Lakeside for the following afternoon, then began the process of canceling the remainder of my planned itinerary. As I packed my suitcase that night, I felt a complicated mix of emotions: concern for Jenny, resignation at cutting my journey short, but also a quiet determination. I was returning home, yes, but not to resume my old role. Something had fundamentally changed in me during these weeks of freedom, and there would be no going back to the woman I was before. The Eleanor Wilson boarding the plane to Lakeside was not the same woman who had sat alone in Castellanos on her 70th birthday. She had seen the sunrise over mountain peaks, stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, felt the spray of the Pacific on her face. She had made new friends, conquered fears, discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed, and most importantly, she had learned that it was possible to love her family deeply while still maintaining boundaries and honoring her own needs. As the plane lifted off, carrying me back to the complications I had temporarily escaped. I made a silent promise to myself. This return wasn't an ending to my journey of self-discovery. It was merely an intermission. The Lakeside airport hadn't changed during my absence. The same beige walls, the same scratched plastic seating in the arrival area, the same local business advertisements lining the corridor to baggage claim. What had changed, however, was me. Walking through the familiar terminal, I noticed how my posture remained straight, my pace purposeful. 6 weeks ago, I might have hurried, anxious about keeping whoever was waiting for me waiting too long. Today, I moved at my own rhythm, taking time to collect my thoughts before facing what lay ahead. Daniel stood near the baggage carousel, shifting, his weight from foot to foot, a habit he displayed when uncomfortable. My son-in-law had always been something of an enigma to me, a former high school football star who had settled into teaching physical education and coaching, a man of few words who nevertheless commanded respect from rowdy teenagers. He spotted me and raised a hand in half-hearted greeting. "Eleanor," he said as I approached. No hug, which was typical for him. "Flight okay?" "Fine, thank you. How's Jenny?" He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair. "Home now. Doctor gave her something for anxiety, said she needs to rest. Physical symptoms should resolve with the medication and reduced stress." He delivered this information like he might announce football statistics, factual, unemotional. "And the children?" "They're okay. Emma's at a friend's house. Lucas is home with Jenny." He reached for my suitcase. "Cars in short-term parking." The drive to their house passed mostly in silence. I considered asking about their financial situation, but decided against it. Better to speak with Jenny directly when she was feeling stronger. Instead, I watched the familiar landmarks of Lakeside pass by, the town square with its Victorian gazebo, the high school where both Jenny and Daniel worked, the shopping center where I'd bought my groceries for years. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow smaller than I remembered. "Victoria's been calling," Daniel said abruptly, breaking the silence as we turned into their neighborhood. "Wants to know if we're taking any of the furniture before. She sells it all." "I see," I replied neutrally. He shot me a sidelong glance. "Jenny's pretty torn up about losing the house. Says it's the last connection to her dad." I bit back my initial response, that Robert had severed that connection himself 20 years ago when he walked out on us, and instead said, "That must be difficult for her." Daniel grunted, whether in agreement or skepticism I couldn't tell. We pulled into their driveway moments later. Their home, a handsome colonial-style house with black shutters and a wraparound porch, showed subtle signs of neglect. Unraked leaves from the previous fall still clustered in corners, a shutter hanging slightly askew. The garden beds I'd helped. Jenny plant now sprouting more weeds than flowers. Lucas was waiting just inside the door, my 14-year-old grandson having shot up several inches since I'd last seen him in person. He hung back, awkward in that uniquely teenage way, before allowing me a brief hug. "Hey, Grandma," he mumbled. "Mom's upstairs." I found Jenny in the master bedroom, propped up against pillows, looking pale but composed. Her eyes widened slightly when I entered, as if she hadn't quite believed I would actually come. "Mom," she said, attempting to sit up straighter. "You didn't have to rush back." Of course I did. I set my purse down and perched on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Embarrassed, mostly." She smoothed the comforter across her lap. "I've never fallen apart like that before." "The doctor called it a panic attack?" She nodded, looking down at her hands. "My chest got tight. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning. I thought I was having a heart attack. One of the other teachers called an ambulance." "That must have been frightening." "It was." Her eyes filled with tears. "But do you know what scared me more? Realizing how quickly everything could collapse. One minute I thought we had a stable life, and the next..." She trailed off, gesturing helplessly. I chose my next words carefully. Jenny, what's really going on with your finances? You and Daniel both have good jobs. She wiped at her eyes. It's complicated. We refinanced the house a few years ago to pay for some renovations. Then Daniel's mother needed help with her medical bills. The monthly payments you were making. She broke off, clearly uncomfortable bringing up the money directly. The monthly support I was providing, I filled in. Yes, we had come to rely on it. When it stopped suddenly, we couldn't adjust quickly enough. We're behind on the mortgage, the car payment, everything. And Mark? Olivia mentioned they're having financial issues as well. Jenny nodded. Mark's business has been struggling since the Harrington account pulled out last year. He never told you because he was too proud. Your monthly contribution was keeping them afloat. I absorbed this information in silence. My children, who appeared so successful on the surface, had been living beyond their means for years, using my financial support as a crutch rather than addressing the underlying problems. Why didn't either of you ever say anything? I asked finally. Jenny looked genuinely surprised. You always just handled things. Whenever we had a problem, you stepped in with a solution. It was easier to accept your help than admit we were struggling. Her words struck me with unexpected force. I had believed I was being generous, supportive, the kind of mother who would do anything for her children. But in my eagerness to help, had I actually enabled their dependency? Had my constant rescuing prevented them from developing resilience and financial responsibility? I see, I said, more to myself than to Jenny. And now Victoria is selling the house. That seems to have been the final straw. Jenny's expression darkened. She didn't even warn us. Just called last week to say she's accepted an offer, and we have until the end of the month to collect any childhood memorabilia we want to keep. After all these years of treating us like her own children, she's just moving on. I suppressed a surge of vindication at this confirmation that Victoria's maternal act had been just that, an act maintained as long as it served her purposes. Perhaps it's for the best, I suggested gently. A clean break. But it's Dad's house, Jenny insisted, a note of childish desperation in her voice. Our house, before. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Before Victoria. Before the divorce. Before our family fractured into before and after. What would you have done if Victoria had offered you the chance to buy it? I asked, genuinely curious. Given your current financial situation? She looked away. I don't know. Mark thought maybe you could help us purchase it. Before you left, I mean. So that had been their plan, to ask me to buy Robert and Victoria's house for them, the very home he had shared with the woman he left me for. The irony was almost too much. Jenny, I said carefully, I think you and Mark need to accept that the house is gone, just like your father has been gone for 5 years now. Holding on to these connections isn't healthy, especially when the connections themselves were built on such shaky foundations. She looked at me, startled by my frankness. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but then her shoulders slumped. Maybe you're right. I hate change. I know you do. But sometimes change is necessary for growth. I patted her hand. Now, you should rest. I'm going to go settle in at my place and check on things there. I'll come back tomorrow and we can start figuring out practical solutions to these problems. You're not staying here? She looked disappointed. No, I think it's better if I stay at my own house. Diane has been checking on it, but I should make sure everything is in order. I stood up. Is there anything you need before I go? She shook her head, then hesitated. Actually, yes. Could you stop by and check on Mark? He won't admit it, but he's been really stressed too. Of course, I'll call him on my way home. Mark's voice when he answered sounded wary, as if expecting bad news. When I told him I was back in Lakeside and wanted to stop by, his relief was palpable. "Come for dinner," he insisted. "Sophia's making lasagna. Olivia will be thrilled to see you." I agreed, asking for an hour to go home first and freshen up. Diane had arranged for a taxi to pick me up at Jenny's house, and 20 minutes later, I was unlocking my own front door, inhaling the familiar scent of lemon furniture polish and the faint perfume of dried lavender from the sachets I kept in my closets. Everything was immaculate. Diane had clearly been doing more than just checking on the place. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the hall table, and a welcome home note propped beside them made me smile. I would have to thank her properly later. I unpacked quickly, then stood in my bedroom, looking around at the space that had been mine, alone for so many years. After weeks in hotel rooms and cabins, my modest house felt luxurious. My comfortable bed with its handmade quilt, my reading chair positioned perfectly beside the window, my familiar belongings arranged just as I liked them. Yet something felt different. The house was the same, but I had changed. The woman who had left 6 weeks ago would have immediately started checking for dust, reorganizing, making lists of chores. Today, I simply appreciated having a peaceful space to call my own. After a quick shower and change of clothes, I drove to Mark's house, a modern 2-story in one of Lakeside's newer developments. Sophia answered the door, wiping her hands on an apron, her smile warm but tinged with anxiety. "Eleanor, we've missed you," she said, offering a quick hug. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." The house showed subtle signs of stress. Mail piled. On the entry table, a basket of unfolded laundry visible in the living room, dishes stacked in the sink. Sophia had always kept an immaculate home, and these small indicators of disorder spoke volumes about their current state. Olivia appeared from upstairs, her expression brightening when she saw me. "Grandma, you're back early." "I couldn't stay away from my favorite granddaughter," I teased, accepting her eager hug. 17 now, Olivia was a lovely young woman, with her mother's gentle features and a confidence all her own. "Did you see the Grand Canyon? Did you take pictures? Was it amazing?" Her questions tumbled out rapidly, a welcome contrast to the strained atmosphere of the house. "Yes to all 3, I assured her. "I'll show you the photos after dinner." Mark emerged from his home office, looking more haggard than I had expected. My son had always taken pride in his appearance, pressed shirts, neatly trimmed hair, a professional demeanor befitting an accountant. The man who greeted me had shadows under his eyes, a shirt that needed ironing, and a defeat in his posture that concerned me deeply. "Mom," he said, mustering a smile. "Welcome home." Dinner was a somewhat stilted affair. Sophia's lasagna was delicious, but conversation remained superficial. Olivia's school activities, my truncated travel adventures, local gossip about neighbors I barely remembered. No one mentioned financial troubles, Victoria's house sale, or Jenny's health crisis. Only after Olivia had been dispatched to finish homework did Mark finally broach more serious topics. "So," he said, swirling the remains of his wine in his glass, "Jenny told you about our situation?" "Some of it," I acknowledged, though I suspect there's more to the story. Sophia and Mark exchanged glances. "We should have been more honest with you," Sophia admitted. "Things have been difficult for a while now." "The Harrington account was just the beginning," Mark added. "Several other business clients scaled back or left entirely. The accounting firm is barely breaking even." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Mark's smile was bitter. "Pride, mainly. I'm supposed to be the financial expert, remember? The one who manages other people's money for a living? How could I admit I couldn't manage my own?" "Everyone faces setbacks, Mark. Not everyone has spent years lecturing clients about fiscal responsibility while secretly depending on his mother's subsidies to maintain his lifestyle." The self-recrimination in his voice was painful to hear. "And now?" I prompted gently. He sighed. "Now we're looking at some hard choices. We might need to sell this house, move to something smaller. Olivia's college fund is intact. I made sure of that, but there's not much cushion beyond it." "What about Victoria's house? Jenny mentioned you had considered trying to buy it." His expression darkened. That was a pipe dream. We couldn't afford it even if Victoria had given us first option, which she didn't. She's already accepted an offer from some developer who plans to tear it down and build 2 smaller homes on the lot. "Tear it down?" I repeated, surprised. The house had been beautiful, a stately colonial on one of Lakeside's best streets. "Progress," Mark said sarcastically. "Apparently the land is worth more than the structure in today's market." I absorbed this information, finding myself oddly unmoved by the impending destruction of the house Robert and Victoria had shared. Perhaps it was fitting that their physical legacy would be dismantled, making way for something new. "I'm meeting with Meredith Thompson tomorrow," I said, referring to my longtime attorney. "I'd like both you and Jenny to join me at her office at 2 p.m. Mark looked puzzled. "Your lawyer? What for?" "To discuss some financial matters that concern all of us." I kept my tone neutral, not wanting to reveal too much before I had a chance to finalize the details with Meredith. "Mom, if this is about helping us out of this mess," I held up a hand. "Let's save that discussion for tomorrow, when Jenny can be part of it as well. For now, I'd love to show Olivia those Grand Canyon photos I promised." Later that night, back in my own home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, thinking through what I had learned and what I planned to do. The financial dependency my children had developed troubled me deeply. In trying to make their lives easier, I had inadvertently fostered a reliance that had left them vulnerable when my support was withdrawn. That needed to change, not just for their sakes, but for their children's as well. I didn't want Olivia, Lucas, and Emma growing up with the same unhealthy relationship to money and security. At the same time, I couldn't simply abandon them to sink or swim, especially now that I understood the extent of their difficulties. The inheritance I had planned to redirect away from them after my birthday debacle needed to be reconsidered, but not in the way they might expect. I called Meredith early the next morning, explaining what I wanted to do. She listened carefully, asked several clarifying questions, and agreed to prepare the necessary documents before our afternoon meeting. "Are you certain about this approach, Eleanor?" she asked as our conversation wound down. "It's rather unorthodox." "I'm certain," I replied. "It might not be what they're expecting, but I believe it's what they need." "Very well. I'll see you all at 2. I spent the morning in my garden, which had been beautifully maintained in my absence. The spring flowers were in full bloom: tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, creating a riot of color against the fresh green grass. Diane appeared over the fence mid-morning, bearing coffee and muffins. "Welcome home, traveler," she called. "Though I have to say, you're looking better than when you left. The adventure agreed with you." We settled on the patio, and I filled her in on the abbreviated version of my return. "Jenny had a health scare," I explained, "and both she and Mark are having financial difficulties I wasn't fully aware of." Diane's expression was knowing. "So they're expecting Mother to swoop in and fix everything as usual?" "That appears to be the hope," I acknowledged, "but I have something different in mind." "Good for you," she said firmly. "About time they stood on their own feet." "It's not quite that simple," I admitted. "I bear some responsibility for the situation. I've been enabling their financial dependence for years." "Out of love," Diane pointed out, "and they've been taking advantage of that love, whether they realized it or not." I couldn't argue with her assessment. "Well, things are going to change. I'm meeting with them and my attorney this afternoon." Her eyebrows rose. "Sounds serious." "It is. I'm restructuring my estate plan. They won't be receiving their inheritance. the way they expected. "I bet that will go over well," she said dryly. "Probably not, but it's necessary." At 1:45, I parked outside Meredith Thompson's downtown office. The law firm occupied the entire second floor of one of Lakeside's few professional buildings, its reception area tastefully decorated with local artwork and comfortable leather seating. Meredith had represented me during my divorce from Robert and had handled all my legal matters since, including my will and estate planning. Mark arrived moments after I did, his expression guarded. "Any hint about what this is all about?" he asked as we waited for Jenny. "Patience," I advised. "Let's wait for your sister." Jenny appeared 5 minutes later, looking better than she had the day before, but still fragile, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy about her. She offered me a quick kiss on the cheek before sitting down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Meredith's assistant led us into the conference room, where Meredith waited with a folder of documents before her. She was a handsome woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the crisp efficiency that had served me well during my divorce proceedings. "Thank you all for coming," she began once we were seated. "Eleanor has asked me to discuss some changes to her estate, planning that affect both of you." Mark and Jenny exchanged quick glances. I could practically see the calculations happening behind their eyes, hopes rising that I was about to announce financial rescue, anxiety that I might be further restricting their anticipated inheritance. "As you know," Meredith continued, "Eleanor has accumulated significant assets over her lifetime. Her home, investment portfolio, retirement accounts, and several rental properties, with a combined value of approximately $2 million. I watched my children's expressions carefully. Neither looked surprised by the figure, confirming my suspicion that they had a good idea of my net worth and had been counting on eventually inheriting it. Until recently, Eleanor's will specified that these assets would be divided equally between the two of you upon her death, with education trusts established for each grandchild. Meredith adjusted her reading glasses. However, Eleanor has decided to make substantial changes to this arrangement. Now their postures stiffened, attention fully engaged. Instead of waiting until her death, Eleanor has decided to execute a living legacy plan, which will transfer a significant portion of her assets to both of you immediately, with conditions. "Conditions?" Mark repeated, frowning slightly. I leaned forward. "Let me explain. I've realized that waiting until I'm going to pass on my assets makes little sense. You need help now, not years in the future. But I've also realized that simply giving you money, as I've been doing for years with those monthly transfers, hasn't fostered financial independence. In fact, it's done the opposite." Jenny's cheeks flushed slightly. "Mom, we never meant to take advantage." I raised a hand. "I'm not accusing you of that. This is as much my responsibility as yours. I enabled a dependency that wasn't healthy for any of us. Now I want to fix it." Meredith slid documents across the table. "The living legacy plan works like this. Eleanor will immediately transfer $500,000 to each of you, which can be used to resolve your current financial difficulties, paying off mortgages, clearing debts, establishing emergency funds." Both Mark and Jenny stared at the papers before them, momentarily speechless. "Additionally," Meredith continued, "Eleanor will establish a family business investment fund of $1 million to be jointly managed by both of you, with Eleanor as a non-voting advisor. This fund is intended to create a sustainable income stream for your families." Mark found his voice first. "A family business? What kind of business?" "That will be for you to decide and develop together," I explained. "The investment fund gives you capital to create something that can support both families long-term, rather than relying on my continued subsidies. The remaining assets," Meredith went on, "will be divided as follows. The existing education. Trusts for the grandchildren will be maintained as previously established. Eleanor's home and personal possessions will remain hers until her death, at which point they will be divided according to her wishes. The rental properties will be transferred to a family trust, which will provide a modest but stable income stream for all family members, including the grandchildren when they reach adulthood. Jenny was scanning the documents, her brow furrowed. "And the conditions you mentioned?" Meredith nodded. "Yes. The immediate transfers of $500,000 each are contingent upon both of you completing a comprehensive financial management course, which Eleanor has already arranged and paid for. The Family Business Investment Fund requires quarterly meetings, with a business advisor for the first 2 years, and all major decisions must be unanimous between the two of you. Additionally," I added, "no further financial assistance will be provided beyond what's outlined in this plan. The monthly transfers I've been making for years will not resume. This is it, your inheritance, given now when you need it, rather than later when I'm gone." Silence fell over the conference room as Mark and Jenny absorbed what they were being offered, and what was being asked of them in return. Mark was the first to speak, his voice carefully controlled. "Let me make sure I understand. You're giving us each $500,000 now, plus setting up this business investment fund we'll manage together. In return, we take a financial management course and agree to work with an advisor on whatever business we develop. And that's it?" "That's the essence of it, yes," Meredith confirmed. "Why?" Jenny asked, looking directly at me. "Why now? And why this way?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because I love you both too much to keep enabling patterns that aren't serving you. And because I'd rather see you use your inheritance while I'm alive to enjoy watching what you do with it." "But the stipulations," Mark began, "are non-negotiable," I finished firmly. "The financial course isn't punishment, it's a tool. And requiring you to work together on the investment fund isn't about controlling you. It's about strengthening your relationship with each other. After I'm gone, you'll need each other more than ever." Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," Meredith interjected. "Take the documents home, review them carefully, discuss them with your spouses. Eleanor has set a deadline of 2 weeks for your decision." "And if we don't agree to the conditions?" Mark asked, ever the pragmatist. I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Then the original will remain in effect. You'll receive your inheritance after I'm gone, with no conditions, but also no immediate assistance with your current financial situations." They exchanged glances again, a silent communication passing between them. Then Mark nodded slowly. "We'll think about it," he said, gathering the documents and placing them carefully in his briefcase. As we prepared to leave, Jenny touched my arm. "Does this mean you're staying in Lakeside? No more traveling?" I smiled. "I'm staying for now, to help with this transition. But my traveling days aren't over, Jenny. They've only just begun." Her answering smile was small but genuine. "I think I'm starting to understand that." Outside on the sidewalk, Mark hesitated before we parted ways. "This isn't what I expected when you called this meeting," he admitted. "I know. It's actually better. More than we deserve, probably." "It's exactly what you deserve," I corrected him. "A chance to build something meaningful with my help, but ultimately through your own efforts." He nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." He leaned down and kissed my cheek, an uncharacteristic display of affection that warmed my heart. As I drove home, I felt a curious lightness. The plan I had set in motion wasn't perfect, no plan ever is, but it felt right. I was offering my children a hand up rather than a handout, a chance to learn from past mistakes while securing their futures. More importantly, I was breaking the cycle of financial dependence that had weakened our family bonds rather than strengthening them. That evening, as I worked in my garden by the golden light of sunset, Planting new seedlings alongside the established perennials, I thought about growth and change, about roots and new blooms. My children had difficult choices ahead, challenges to face, lessons to learn. But for the first time in years, I was hopeful about our family's future, not because I was taking control, but because I was finally letting go. The 2 weeks I had given Mark and Jenny to consider my proposal passed more quickly than any of us anticipated. Spring was fully asserting itself in Lakeside, magnolia trees bursting into magnificent pink and white blooms, daffodils nodding, their bright heads along garden borders, the lake itself shimmering under increasingly warm sunshine. I spent my mornings in my garden and my afternoons catching up with friends I hadn't seen during my travels. Diane and I resumed our tradition of Saturday morning coffee on my patio, and I joined my book club for their monthly meeting, where I was treated like a minor celebrity for having actually visited some of the places described in our current novel. I deliberately gave Mark and Jenny space during this time. They needed to discuss my offer with their spouses, to weigh the immediate financial relief against the responsibilities and conditions that came with it. More importantly, they needed to talk to each other, something they had done less in recent years, despite living in the same town and sharing family occasions. 10 days after our meeting with Meredith, Jenny called to invite me to dinner at their house. "Mark and Sophia will be there too," she added. "We've made our decision." I accepted, of course, though I felt a flutter of anxiety as I hung up. Had I asked too much of them? Would they reject my offer out of pride or resistance to the conditions? I reminded myself that whatever they decided, I had acted out of love and a genuine desire to help them build more stable, independent lives. When I arrived at Jenny's house that evening, the atmosphere was noticeably different from my previous visit. The porch had been swept, the flower beds weeded, the crooked shutter repaired. Inside, the house smelled of roasting chicken and fresh bread. Emma greeted me at the door with an enthusiastic hug, chattering about a school project as she led me to the dining room where the table was set with Jenny's good china, a wedding gift from me that rarely saw use. Mark and Sophia were already there, Sophia helping Daniel in the kitchen while Mark and Lucas discussed a baseball game on television. Olivia sat at the dining table, textbooks spread before her, though she quickly cleared them away when she saw me. "Grandma, did you know Dad and Uncle Daniel are thinking about opening a sporting goods store? Isn't that cool?" Her eyes were bright with excitement. I raised my eyebrows, glancing toward Mark, who gave a small shake of his head, a silent request not to pursue the topic yet. I understood. They would tell me their decision in their own time. Dinner was the most relaxed family meal I could remember in years. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the underlying tension that had characterized our recent gatherings. Jenny looked better than she had since my return, some color back in her cheeks, her smile reaching her eyes. Mark, too, seemed more like himself, his posture straightened, a spark of enthusiasm returning when he discussed Olivia's college options. After the children had been excused and Daniel began clearing the dishes, Mark cleared his throat. "So, Mom," he began, "we've spent a lot of time thinking about your offer." Jenny nodded, reaching across the table to take her brother's hand in a gesture of solidarity that brought an unexpected lump to my throat. "We've decided to accept," Mark continued. "All of it. The immediate transfers, the investment fund, the financial management classes. Everything." I exhaled slowly, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. "I'm glad to hear that. But we wanted to explain what we're planning to do with the investment fund," Jenny added, "because it's not exactly what you might have expected." I sat back, indicating they should continue. Mark leaned forward. "We've been talking, really talking, for the first time in years, about what went wrong with our finances, about our strengths and weaknesses, about what kind of legacy we want to create. And we realized something important," Jenny picked up. "We both ended up in careers that serve others, Mark helping small businesses manage their finances, me teaching high school students. But somewhere along the way, We lost sight of the service aspect and started focusing on the status, on maintaining appearances. The big houses, the new cars, the expensive vacations, Mark added. None of it was making us happy, but we kept chasing it anyway. I nodded, understanding all too well how easy it was to confuse possessions with happiness. So we're going to use the investment fund to open a community sports complex, Jenny announced, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Daniel has been dreaming about this for years. An affordable facility where kids from all backgrounds can play indoor sports year-round, take lessons, get coaching. The business model actually makes a lot of sense, Mark added. There's nothing like it within 50 miles of Lakeside. We've done initial projections, and with the startup capital from the investment fund, we could be profitable within 2 years. Daniel would manage the day-to-day operations, Jenny continued. He already has contacts with coaches and instructors throughout the region, and Mark would handle the financial side, budgeting, payroll, taxes. And Sophia wants to open a physical therapy practice within the facility, Mark added. She's been wanting to leave the hospital and work independently for years, but we could never afford the startup costs. I listened, genuinely impressed by how thoroughly they had thought this through. And your role, Jenny? I asked. She smiled. Community outreach and education programs. We want to offer scholarships for low-income kids, host tournaments for local schools, maybe even develop after-school tutoring programs that combine academics and athletics. We're calling it the Wilson Family Fieldhouse, Mark said. If that's okay with you, we want your name, our family name, to stand for something positive in this community. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I think it's a wonderful idea, I said softly. Better than anything I could have imagined. Jenny reached across the table and squeezed my hand. There's something else we want to tell you. We've both put our houses on the market. This surprised me. Both of you? But where will you live? We're downsizing, Mark explained. Dramatically. We've found adjacent properties, modest 3-bedroom homes on the north side of town. They need some work, but they're solid houses. With good bones, and they're within our means, especially after we pay off our current mortgages with the funds you're providing. The best part, Jenny added, is that they share a backyard. We're going to take down the fence between them and create one big family space where all the kids can play together while still giving each family their privacy. I was momentarily speechless. When I had proposed the Living Legacy plan, I had hoped it would help my children achieve financial stability. I hadn't dared hope it might also bring them closer together, both literally and figuratively. That sounds wonderful, I finally managed, my voice thick with emotion. We've already signed up for the financial management course, Mark said. First session is next week. And we've started meeting with a business advisor to refine our plan for the sports complex, Jenny added. He thinks we could break ground by fall if all goes well with permits and zoning. I looked at my children, really looked at them, and saw something I hadn't seen in a very long time: purpose, determination, and genuine excitement about their future. The financial crisis that had seemed so devastating just weeks ago had become a catalyst for positive change. I'm proud of you both, I said simply. So very proud. Later that night, as Daniel walked me to my car, he hung back slightly, wanting a private word. I need to thank you, he said, his deep voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Not just for the money, though that's, well, it's life-changing, but for believing in us enough to give us this chance. Your family, Daniel, I replied. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy and secure. He nodded, jamming his hands into his pockets. Jenny told me something the other day that really hit home. She said her whole life she's been trying to recreate what she had before. Her dad left, that sense of solidity, of being part of something special. That's why she hung on to Victoria for so long, why the house meant so much to her. I listened, touched that Jenny had shared something so personal with him and that he was sharing it with me. But she said she finally realized she's been looking backward instead of forward, Daniel continued, that we needed to build our own foundation, not try to reclaim one that was already broken. He paused. She said she learned that from you, from watching you start over after the divorce, and again these past few months with your travels. I felt a swell of emotion that made it momentarily difficult to speak. She's a remarkable woman, your wife, I finally said, and not just because she's my daughter. Daniel smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually stoic features. Don't I know it? The following weeks brought a flurry of activity that transformed our family in ways I could never have predicted. Mark and Jenny threw themselves into their financial management course with surprising enthusiasm, often calling me to share concepts they were learning as if they were revolutionary discoveries, which, for them, they were. Seeing my financially struggling children suddenly excited about emergency funds and debt-to-income ratios was both amusing and deeply satisfying. The plans for the Wilson family field house progressed rapidly. They found a suitable property, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that could be renovated for far less than building from scratch. The business advisor I had insisted upon proved invaluable, helping them navigate zoning requirements, develop realistic financial projections, and create a solid business plan to present to the local planning commission. Both families put their houses on the market, and in the robust spring real estate season, they sold more quickly than expected. The move to their new, more modest homes was planned for early summer, giving the children time to finish the school year at their current schools. Through all of this, I maintained a supportive but hands-off approach. When asked for advice, I gave it. Otherwise, I allowed them to make their own decisions, and yes, their own mistakes. There were plenty of those. A contractor who didn't work out, unexpected repairs needed on the new homes, disagreements about the design of the fieldhouse logo. But they handled each challenge with growing confidence. The most rewarding aspect, for me, was seeing Mark and Jenny working together, rediscovering the sibling bond that had weakened over years of separate lives and competing priorities. Victoria's departure from Lakeside proceeded as planned. The sale of Robert's house closed, and within weeks, demolition crews arrived to tear down the structure that had once been my home, then Robert and Victoria's, and finally just a painful reminder of past betrayals. I drove by one day out of curiosity and found myself feeling nothing but relief as I watched the walls come down. The house had never been the problem. It was what the house represented. Broken promises, divided loyalties, the illusion that material surroundings could compensate for emotional disconnection. One afternoon in late April, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, pruning roses, when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. The woman who emerged was instantly familiar, though we hadn't stood face-to-face in years. Victoria, elegant as ever in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde hair now highlighted with strategic strands of silver. She hesitated at the garden gate, clearly uncertain of her welcome. "Eleanor," she called. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I straightened, removing my gardening gloves. "Victoria, this is a surprise." "I'm leaving tomorrow," she said, approaching cautiously. "Moving to Sedona. My sister's there." I nodded, waiting. We both knew she hadn't come to share travel plans. She glanced around at my garden, visibly gathering her thoughts. "Beautiful roses. You always did have a way. With plants." "Thank you," I replied, not making it easier for her. After all she had taken from me over the years, she could at least work for this conversation. "I wanted to," she began, then stopped, seemingly reconsidering her words. "Mark and Jenny told me what you're doing for them. The inheritance, the business investment. It's very generous. They're my children," I said simply. She nodded, looking uncomfortable. "They were very upset about the house being sold. I didn't handle that well. I should have given them more notice, more consideration. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this admission. Perhaps, but it's done now. Yes, she agreed. It is. She hesitated again, then reached into her handbag and withdrew a small box. This was Robert's. He would have wanted Mark to have it. I took the box and opened it. Inside was Robert's pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. I remembered it well. He had worn it on special occasions throughout our marriage. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciative of the gesture. Mark will treasure this. Victoria nodded, then said abruptly, I never apologized to you, not properly. No, you didn't. I told myself it was just one of those things that happen. People fall in and out of love. But that wasn't the whole truth. She met my eyes directly for the first time. I pursued Robert knowing he was married. I wanted what you had, the beautiful home, the successful husband, the perfect family. I convinced myself I deserved it, more than you did. I said nothing, letting her continue. It wasn't until Robert died that I realized what I'd actually done, not just to you, but to Mark and Jenny as well. I tried to be a mother to them, but I was always performing the role, never truly inhabiting it. They could feel the difference. Yes, I agreed quietly. They could. She looked away, blinking rapidly. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of it. For the pain I caused. For the family I helped break apart. She gave a small, bitter laugh. For what it's worth, it wasn't the fairy tale I imagined. It would be. Robert never quite. He never loved me the way he loved you. This confession, delivered in Victoria's carefully modulated voice, struck me with unexpected force. For 20 years, I had carried the wound of Robert's betrayal, assuming he had found greater happiness with Victoria than with me. To hear otherwise should have been vindicating, but instead, I felt only a profound sadness for all the years wasted on bitterness and rivalry. I forgive you, Victoria, I said, the words emerging before I had consciously decided to speak them. Not for your sake, but for mine. I'm too old to carry around resentment anymore. She looked startled, then oddly relieved. Thank you. I didn't expect that. Neither did I admitted with a small smile. Safe travels to Sedona. I hear it's beautiful there. She nodded, turned to go, then paused. Your children are lucky, you know, to have a mother who loves them enough to push them toward independence rather than dependency. I wish. She didn't finish the thought, just gave a small wave and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away, thinking about the strange paths our lives had taken, from bitter rivals to two aging women finally making an uneasy peace with the past. I wondered briefly about her children, David and Susan, whom Robert had chosen over Riley in the original story. Where were they now? Had they stayed in touch with Mark and Jenny? I realized I knew almost nothing about them, having mentally categorized them simply as the other family for so many years. That evening, I called Mark and gave him Robert's pocket watch. He was visibly moved, turning the antique timepiece over in his hands with reverence. Dad showed this to me when I was a kid, he said softly. Told me it would be mine someday. I thought it was lost after he died. Victoria found it, I explained. She came to say goodbye before moving to Arizona. Mark looked up surprised. She came to see you? That must have been awkward. Actually, it was. Clarifying. I hesitated, then decided to share the rest. She apologized, Mark, for everything that happened with your father. He was silent for a moment, absorbing this. Did it help, hearing her say that after all this time? I considered the question carefully. I think it did, though not in the way I might have expected years ago. It made me realize how much energy I've spent holding on to old hurts, defining myself by what was taken from me rather than what I still had. Which was us, Mark said quietly. Yes, I agreed. Always you and Jenny, and now your children too. He smiled, slipping the watch into his pocket. Speaking of the next generation, Olivia wanted me to ask you something. She's been researching colleges and there's a weekend tour at Northwestern next month. She was hoping you might go with her. Just the two of you. A grandmother-granddaughter trip. I'd love to, I said, touched by the invitation. But why me instead of you or Sophia? Mark's expression grew thoughtful. I think she was inspired by your travels. She said something about wanting to see the world through your eyes for a change. He chuckled. Plus, she thinks you're cool now that you've become an adventurer. Well, we can't waste this brief window where a 17-year-old finds her grandmother cool, I laughed. Tell her I'm in. The Northwestern trip with Olivia became the first of many shared journeys. While I had initially cut my national parks tour short to return to Lakeside, I soon found ways to combine my newfound love of travel with strengthening family bonds. Lucas joined me for a weekend in Washington, D.C., where his burgeoning interest in history made the museums come alive. Emma and I took a 3-day trip to New York, seeing Broadway shows and visiting art galleries that nurtured her creative spirit. These focused, one-on-one trips allowed me to truly know my grandchildren as individuals, not just as extensions of their parents. Meanwhile, the Wilson Family Fieldhouse project moved from planning to reality. Ground was broken in late summer, with the entire family present for the ceremony. The local newspaper covered the event, describing it as a much-needed community resource being developed by two of Lakeside's most prominent families. Mark and Jenny stood together for the photographs, looking confident and purposeful as they described their vision for an inclusive athletic facility that would serve children of all backgrounds and abilities. We want to create opportunities, Jenny told the reporter, especially for kids who might not otherwise have access to quality sports coaching and facilities. And we're establishing a scholarship program, Mark added, to ensure that financial constraints never prevent a child from participating. Standing off to the side, watching my children articulate this vision with such clarity and conviction, I felt a surge of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. This was their legacy now, not just a business, but a gift to the community. That had been our home for generations. The financial management course proved transformative for both families. They learned to budget effectively, to distinguish between needs and wants, to save systematically for future goals. Their new, more modest homes reflected this shift in priorities, comfortable and welcoming, but without the expensive trappings that had characterized their previous residences. The shared backyard quickly became the center of family life, with weekend barbecues, a vegetable garden tended by all 3 grandchildren, and even a handmade fire pit where we gathered on cool autumn evenings to roast marshmallows and tell stories. By Christmas, my 71st, the transformation was complete. We celebrated at Mark's new home, which was decorated simply but beautifully. The gifts exchanged were thoughtful rather than extravagant. Hand-knitted scarves, photo albums, books chosen with specific interests in mind. Emma had painted a watercolor of my garden that brought me to tears with its sensitivity and attention to detail. Olivia gave me a travel journal for my next adventure, its pages already partially filled with research she had done on potential destinations. After dinner, as we sat around the fireplace sipping hot chocolate, Mark raised his mug in a toast. To Mom, he said, his voice warm with affection. Who gave us the greatest gift of all this year? Not just financial support, but the push we needed to become the people we were meant to be. To Grandma, echoed Olivia, raising her own mug. The coolest 71-year-old adventurer we know. To Eleanor, Daniel added, with a nod of deep respect, who taught us all that it's never too late to start a new chapter. As I looked around at these dear faces, my children, their spouses, my grandchildren. I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for decades. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been painful confrontations, difficult truths, reluctant admissions of past mistakes. But through it all, we had emerged stronger, more authentic, more connected. And, to all of you, I responded, raising my own mug, for having the courage to change, to grow, to build something new together. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Jenny pulled me aside for a private word. "I've been thinking a lot about last year," she said softly. "About your birthday, and how I let you down." I shook my head. "That's ancient history now, Jenny." "No, I need to say this." She took a deep breath. "I was so caught up in my own needs, in Victoria's drama, in keeping up appearances, that I forgot what really matters. I forgot to honor the one person who has always, always been there for us." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her tears dampen my shoulder. "I know, sweetheart. And I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Your birthday is coming up again in August. We want to do something really special this year. All of us together. Would that be okay?" I smiled, touching her cheek gently. "That would be lovely. But you should know I'm planning a trip to Europe in September. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, all the places I've always wanted to see." Instead of disappointment, Jenny's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That sounds amazing. You have to send us pictures, call us from each city. Maybe next summer we could all go somewhere together, a big family trip." This reaction, so different from the guilt-inducing protest of a year ago, was perhaps the clearest indicator of how much had changed. My daughter now saw my independence as something to celebrate, rather than something that threatened her security. "I'd like that very much," I told her. "A family adventure." As I drove home that night, through the quiet streets of Lakeside, decorated with holiday lights, I reflected on the extraordinary year just past. What had begun with the pain of rejection, sitting alone at that restaurant table on my 70th birthday, had somehow transformed into one of the most meaningful chapters of my life. By standing up for myself, by refusing to continue enabling unhealthy patterns, I had set in motion changes that benefited not just me, but everyone I loved. My children had skipped my 70th birthday for their stepmother's party, and in response I had reimagined their inheritance, not withholding it out of spite, but restructuring it out of love and wisdom. The result wasn't just financial, stability for Mark and Jenny, but a renewed sense of purpose, a stronger sibling bond, and a family legacy that would serve the community for generations to come. As for me, Eleanor Wilson, once defined primarily as Robert's ex-wife and Mark and Jenny's mother, I had discovered a new identity. Traveler, adventurer, wise matriarch who had found the perfect balance between family connection and personal freedom. At 71, I was just getting started. 5 years have passed since that pivotal 70th birthday that changed everything. At 75, I find myself sitting on the terrace of a small cafe in Santorini, watching the Mediterranean. Sun cast golden light across whitewashed buildings and the impossibly blue sea beyond. This is my third visit to Greece. I've developed a particular fondness for the rhythm of life here, the way time seems to expand and contract according to human needs rather than mechanical schedules. My travel journal rests on the table beside my coffee cup, its pages filled with 5 years of adventures, the lavender fields of Provence, the misty mountains of Scotland, the bustling markets of Marrakesh. Some journeys taken alone, savoring the freedom of answering only to my own curiosity. Others shared with family, Mark and Sophia celebrating their 25th anniversary in Venice, Jenny overcoming her fear of flying to join me in London, All 3 grandchildren accompanying me on a safari in South Africa last year. A high school graduation gift for Olivia. A text message lights up my phone. Olivia sending a photo from her Northwestern University dorm room, where she's beginning her junior year studying international business. Room decorated. Missing you, Grandma. Can't wait for our Thanksgiving meetup in New York. The backdrop shows the travel map we created together, with pins marking every place she's visited, and colorful strings connecting future destinations she plans to explore. I smile, typing back. Beautiful. Meeting with that professor I told you about tomorrow. We'll send updates. Love you. Olivia and I have developed a special bond these past few years, united by our shared wanderlust and curiosity about the world. For her 20th birthday, I established a travel fund specifically for her educational adventures. Not an outright gift, but a matching program where I double whatever she saves from her part-time job. She's already used it for a semester in Barcelona and an archaeological dig in Peru. The waiter refills my coffee without being asked, a familiar courtesy extended to the American grandmother, who has become a regular at this cafe during her month-long stay. "Your friends, they come today?" he asks in careful English. "Tomorrow," I confirm. My daughter and granddaughter. Jenny and Emma are flying in for the final week of my Greek sojourn, Jenny's first international trip without Daniel, who's staying behind to oversee the summer youth program at the Wilson family fieldhouse. Emma, now 17, has been counting down the days, filling our family group chat with questions about what to pack and which islands we'll visit. The fieldhouse. I smile at the thought of how successful it has become. What began as a modest community sports facility has expanded into a true lakeside institution, offering everything from competitive team sports to senior fitness classes, adaptive athletics for children with disabilities to professional training for aspiring college athletes. 4 years after opening, they had to expand the building to accommodate growing demand. Mark and Jenny still run it together, their complementary skills creating a harmony in their professional relationship that has spilled over into their personal connection as well. My phone chimes again. This time a message from Lucas, now 19, and studying engineering at Michigan State. "Grandma, guess what? Got the internship at NASA for next summer. Thanks for connecting me with Dr. Harrison." My heart swells with pride. Lucas had struggled academically in high school until we discovered his aptitude for mechanical engineering during a summer robotics camp I had enrolled him in. When I mentioned his talent to my seatmate on a flight to Houston, who happened to be a senior NASA engineer, a mentorship was born that has guided Lucas toward his current path. I contemplate ordering a celebratory glass of wine to toast Lucas's achievement when another message appears. This one from Mark with a photo. Attachment. It shows the newly installed sign in front of the Fieldhouse's latest addition, the Eleanor Wilson Senior Wellness Center. Beneath it, a simple caption. "Surprise. Wanted you to be the first to see it, even from halfway around the world." Tears spring to my eyes before I can stop them. The Senior Wellness Center had been Jenny's idea. A dedicated space offering, exercise classes, health screenings, and social activities specifically designed for Lakeside's aging population. Something that would have made a difference for you, Mom, if it had existed when you were feeling isolated after Dad left. She had explained when first proposing it. They had mentioned naming it after me, but I hadn't realized they'd actually gone through with it. I'm still composing a response to Mark when my phone rings, Jenny's familiar face appearing on the screen. "Did you see it?" she asks immediately, when I answer. Mark wasn't supposed to send that until the official opening next month, but he couldn't wait. "It's beautiful," I say, my voice thick with emotion, though I'm not sure I deserve such an honor. Jenny laughs, the sound carrying across thousands of miles with perfect clarity. "Mom, who are you kidding? That center exists because of you, and not just because you helped fund it. Your whole reinvention after 70 inspired it. We've already got a waiting list of seniors signing up for the travel preparation classes. Travel preparation classes? Physical conditioning, financial planning, and technology training specifically for older adults who want to travel independently, she explains. We're calling it the Eleanor Wilson method, exploring the world after 70. I laugh despite my tears. You're making me sound like a lifestyle brand. You kind of are, Jenny teases. Half the retirement community in Lakeside has your travel blog bookmarked. Mrs. Abernathy from your old book club just got back from Portugal, solo, and she's 82. This makes me smile. After my first few international trips, I had indeed started a simple travel blog, initially just as a way to share photos and stories with family without clogging their email inboxes. Somehow, it had gained a modest following among seniors seeking authentic travel experiences suited to their age and interests. I never monetized it or sought wider attention, but I admit to a certain pride in knowing that my adventures might be inspiring others to expand their horizons. How's everything else at home? I ask, shifting the subject away from myself. Jenny's voice takes on the energetic tone that always emerges when she talks about work. The summer programs are filled to capacity. Daniel's coaching the middle school basketball clinic, and they just qualified for the state tournament. Emma's running the art program for elementary kids. It was her idea to combine sports with creative activities, and the parents love it. And Mark? Sophia? They're good. Sophia's physical therapy practice at the field house is thriving. She's had to hire 2 additional therapists. And Mark? She hesitates. Well, Victoria called him last week. My attention sharpens. Victoria? I haven't heard that name in years. What did she want? Her brother David is having some health problems. Apparently, he never got his life together, even after all this time. No insurance, mounting medical bills. She was hoping Mark might have some advice. And did he? Jenny sighs. He offered to help David apply for assistance programs, maybe find some clinical trials for his condition. But Victoria was fishing for financial help, I think. I see. Victoria reaching out after all this time doesn't particularly surprise me. What does interest me is Mark's response. Practical assistance rather than an immediate checkbook solution. And Mark handled this himself? He didn't come running to you or to me? Nope, Jenny confirms, a note of pride in her voice. He said he felt sorry for David, but wasn't going to throw money at a problem that needed actual life changes to fix. His exact words were, "That's what Mom taught us." Warmth spreads through me, a sense of validation more profound than any monument or named building could provide. 5 years ago, when I restructured their inheritance and challenged them to become financially independent, I couldn't have predicted the extent to which those lessons would transform not just their financial habits, but their entire worldview. That's wonderful to hear, I manage. Anyway, I should let you go. Emma and I are finishing our packing for tomorrow's flight. I still can't believe I'm actually coming to Greece. I can't wait to show you both around, I say sincerely. The islands are magical this time of year. After we hang up, I order that glass of wine after all, raising it in a silent toast to absent family and present joys. The waiter, noticing my solitary celebration, raises an eyebrow questioningly. Good news from home? He asks. The best kind, I reply. The kind that tells you you've done something right. He nods as if he understands perfectly, leaving me to my thoughts and the spectacular sunset beginning to unfold over the Aegean. That evening, as I prepare for bed in my small but charming rental apartment, I find myself reflecting on the extraordinary turn my life has taken since that lonely 70th birthday dinner. Had I remained trapped in my role as the ever-available, financially supportive mother and grandmother, I might now be sitting in my lakeside living room, watching television and waiting for the occasional visit or phone call. Instead, I've created a life rich with experiences, meaningful connections, And yes, the special joy that comes from seeing your children thrive through their own efforts rather than your constant intervention. The inheritance decision, what I now think of as the living legacy plan, proved more transformative than I could have imagined. By giving Mark and Jenny immediate access to a portion of their inheritance, coupled with the responsibility of financial education and joint business development, I had fundamentally altered our family dynamic. No longer was I the bank they turned to in times of need. I had become a respected advisor, a partner in their success, and most importantly, a mother whose own fulfillment added to their lives rather than being sacrificed for them. The family business investment fund that established the Wilson family fieldhouse had grown beyond our initial projections. What began as a community sports facility now encompasses the main athletic complex, Sophia's physical therapy practice, the new senior wellness center, and a scholarship foundation that ensures access for children from all economic backgrounds. Last year, they had even added an educational wing offering tutoring and college preparation for student athletes. More significant than the business success, however, was the personal growth I had witnessed in my children. Mark, once so focused on maintaining appearances and financial status, had developed a genuine passion for creating opportunity for others. Jenny, who had desperately sought approval and connection through people-pleasing, had found her voice as a confident community leader. Their shared project had healed the subtle rift that had developed between them over years of following separate paths and competing priorities. As for the grandchildren, Olivia, Lucas, and Emma, they had grown up witnessing a very different model than many of their peers. Instead of seeing grandparents as dependent elderly relatives or occasional babysitters, they experienced me as a vibrant, independent woman with her own adventures and wisdom to share. Our one-on-one trips together had created special bonds that transcended the usual grandparent-grandchild dynamic, allowing us to know each other as individuals with unique interests and perspectives. The financial lessons had not been lost on them either. All three had student jobs despite their parents' improved financial situations, and each maintained careful budgets that balanced current enjoyment with future security. Olivia had already started a small investment portfolio, often calling me to discuss potential additions. Lucas had designed an app to help college students track expenses and avoid debt. Emma, though still in high school, saved half of her earnings from teaching art classes at the Fieldhouse, with clear goals for how those savings would support her future education. My phone chimes with one last message for the night, a video from Daniel showing the sunset over Lakeside. "Almost as pretty as what you're seeing in Santorini," reads his text. "But we miss you here. Safe travels to Jenny and Emma tomorrow." I smile at this thoughtful gesture from my son-in-law, who had once been the most distant member of our family circle. These past 5 years had revealed depths to Daniel I had never fully appreciated. His dedication to youth sports transcending mere coaching to become true mentorship, his quiet support of Jenny's career ambitions, his willingness to adapt to our changing family dynamics without complaint. In truth, every relationship within our family had deepened and matured since that watershed moment when I decided to stop enabling financial dependency and start encouraging genuine independence. Even my relationship with myself had transformed, from a woman who defined her worth through constant sacrifice to one who had discovered the joy of balanced giving, the freedom of personal pursuits, and the dignity of aging on her own terms. As I drift toward sleep, I find myself looking forward not just to Jenny and Emma's arrival tomorrow, but to all the moments yet to come. Olivia's graduation next year, Lucas's first professional engineering project, Emma's college decision, the continued evolution of the Fieldhouse, and my own future travels. At 75, I feel not at the end of a journey, but in the middle of one. A journey made richer by the knowledge that my family is walking their own paths with confidence, security, and purpose. Morning comes with the brilliant clarity unique to Greek islands. The light so pure it seems to transform ordinary surroundings into something magical. I take my time getting ready, enjoying the ritual of preparing for a day with no fixed agenda beyond coffee at my favorite cafe, and perhaps a walk along the cliffside path with its breathtaking views. My phone rings just as I'm gathering my sun hat and bag. The international calling code tells me it's Mark before I even see his name. "Good morning from Lakeside," he says when I answer. "Or I guess it's afternoon for you." "Just about," I confirm. "Everything all right? It's quite early there." "Everything's fine," he assures me. "Better than fine, actually. I wanted to catch you before Jenny arrives. I have some news I wanted to share just with you first." Something in his tone makes me sit down, giving him my full attention. "I'm listening." "I've been offered a position on the state's Youth Sports Commission," he says, an unmistakable note of pride in his voice. "It's a volunteer appointment, very prestigious. They want me to help develop programs for underserved communities throughout the state, based on what we've created at the Fieldhouse." "Mark, that's wonderful," I exclaim. "Your work is being recognized at a whole new level." "It means more travel, more responsibility," he continues. "I'd need to reorganize some of my duties at the Fieldhouse, trust others to handle things I've always managed personally." I understand immediately why he's calling. Even after 5 years of growing independence, my children still occasionally seek my blessing for major decisions. Not from financial dependency now, but from a place of respect and connection. "You're ready for this challenge," I tell him, without hesitation. The Fieldhouse has a strong foundation and capable leadership. This is a chance to expand your impact beyond Lakeside. He exhales, tension releasing audibly. "That's what Sophia said too. But I wanted your perspective. You've always seen things more clearly than anyone." "When did this become official?" I ask. "The governor called yesterday afternoon. The formal announcement will be next week." He pauses, then adds, "It's a direct result of the Eleanor Wilson Senior Wellness Center, you know. The state health director toured the facility last month and was impressed by our integrated approach. Athletics for youth, wellness for seniors, resources for everyone in between. She's the one who recommended me for the commission." I feel a surge of maternal pride so powerful it momentarily takes my breath away. "Your father would have been so proud of you, Mark." The mention of Robert, something I rarely do, creates a momentary silence. Then Mark says quietly, "Maybe, but it's your pride that matters to me, Mom. Everything good that's happened these past 5 years started with you having the courage to change our relationship, to push us toward real independence rather than just writing checks to solve our problems. I only showed you what was already within you," I say, blinking back tears. "The strength, the vision, the capacity to build something meaningful, those qualities were always there." "But they might have remained dormant without your push," he counters. "Sometimes I think about where we'd be if you hadn't changed everything after that birthday. Probably still in houses we couldn't really afford, still secretly relying on your monthly contributions, still viewing you as the safety net rather than the inspiration you've become." His words strike deep, affirming that the difficult decisions I made 5 years ago, decisions that initially caused pain and resistance, had ultimately led to flourishing rather than mere functioning. "That means more to me than you know," I tell him. "There's one more thing," Mark says. "With this new appointment, I've been thinking about Robert's pocket watch, the one Victoria returned to you." "What about it?" "I'd like to give it to Lucas when he starts his NASA internship. Continue the tradition, passing it to the next generation at a significant moment." I feel a bittersweet tug at my heart. I think that's perfect. Lucas would treasure it. "I'll never be able to thank you enough, Mom. Not just for the inheritance that made the Fieldhouse possible, but for showing us what it means to live with purpose at every stage of life." After we hang up, I sit for a moment on my small terrace, watching ferries cross the deep blue waters toward distant islands. Mark's words echo in my mind, showing us what it means to live with purpose at every stage of life. Had that been my intention when I changed their inheritance and embarked on my own adventures? Perhaps not consciously, but the description resonates deeply with the woman I've become. At 75, I am neither defined solely by my past roles, nor limited by societal expectations of aging. I am Eleanor Wilson, traveler, blogger, mentor, mother, grandmother, philanthropist, friend. The inheritance I restructured for my children 5 years ago ultimately gave me an unexpected gift as, well, the freedom to discover new dimensions of myself, to create a third act worthy of the life that preceded it. My phone chimes with a travel update. Jenny and Emma's flight has departed on schedule. In just a few hours, I'll welcome them to this beautiful island, ready to create new memories together. Tonight we'll dine at a small taverna I've discovered, where the owner's mother makes baklava from a century-old family recipe. Tomorrow we'll take a boat to a secluded beach, accessible only by water. By week's end, we'll have visited ancient ruins, shopped in village markets, and watched spectacular sunsets from clifftop perches. I gather my things and head out into the bright Santorini day, my step light and purposeful. The path leading from my apartment winds downhill toward the cafe where I'll have my morning coffee before meeting Jenny and Emma's ferry. Along the way, locals greet me with familiar nods: the baker, the souvenir shop owner, the elderly man who walks his small dog at the same time each morning. In just a month, I've become part of the rhythm of this place, a temporary but recognized member of its daily life. This sensation of belonging briefly yet genuinely to places far from home has become one of the unexpected joys of my traveling life. I am not a tourist rushing from one photograph opportunity to the next, but a temporary resident, moving at a pace that allows for real connection, meaningful observation, and the small, ordinary pleasures that reveal a culture's true character. As I settle at my usual table, ordering my usual coffee and my practiced but imperfect Greek, I think again of Mark's words about purpose. My purpose during these years was never about escaping family or responsibilities. It was about redefining those connections on healthier terms, about modeling the independence I hoped my children would embrace, about discovering who Eleanor Wilson might be when freed from defining herself solely through others' needs and expectations. The waiter brings my coffee with a small plate of honey-drizzled yogurt. For strength, he says with a wink, "Your family comes today." I thank him, reflecting on the beautiful symmetry of this moment. 5 years ago, I sat alone at a birthday dinner, abandoned by children who had grown too dependent, yet simultaneously too distant. Today, I sit in a Greek cafe, eagerly awaiting the arrival of a daughter and granddaughter who are coming not out of obligation, but genuine desire to share this experience with me, to learn from my adventures even as they create their own. The inheritance my children skipped my birthday to gain from their stepmother never materialized in the way they might have imagined. Victoria left Lakeside with Robert's tangible legacy: the house, the furnishings, the everyday objects that accumulate over a shared life. But the true inheritance, the one that has transformed our family, came from an unexpected source: a mother and grandmother who finally understood that the greatest gift she could offer was not financial security, but the example of a life fully lived at every age. The sun climbs higher over the caldera, boats cut white paths through the azure water below, and I sip my coffee in peaceful anticipation. Whatever adventures today brings, with Jenny and Emma, with future travels, with the continuing evolution of our family's story, I face them with the confidence of a woman who knows her worth extends far beyond the roles she once thought defined her. My 70th birthday may have begun in rejection, but it launched a journey more rewarding than I could have imagined. The inheritance I restructured for my children ultimately became the gift that freed us all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.